I went to Hawaii with my parents, my sister, and her husband. He said he needed to go out alone, so I followed him. He entered a chapel, and there she was, my sister in a white dress next to him. She doesn't know, right? My sister said. Relax, he whispered. My mom laughed, saying, she's too dumb to notice. I walked away in silence. When they came home, they froze at the doorstep. Winter in Boston brought early darkness. Elizabeth Harper was reviewing the last quarterly report while looking down at the city lights from her high-rise office window. Elizabeth had made a name for herself as a respected investment analyst on Wall Street. She embodied the ideal career woman, with her refined features and smart pantsuit, though her eyes held warmth. Good work today. Shouldn't you be heading home? Secretary Emily peeked into the office with concern. The clock already showed 8. Yes, I should. Thank you, Emily. Elizabeth smiled as she closed her laptop and began packing documents into her bag. While she was passionate about her work, what she cherished even more was her warm home life. James Carter, whom she had married 3 years ago, worked as a regular employee at a local bank. Though his position seemed modest compared to Elizabeth's career, his sincerity and kindness had completely captured her heart. I'm sure there's a warm dinner waiting for me at home, she thought, feeling a warmth in her heart. James was a good cook and always prepared something special on days when she worked late. When she opened the door to their home, the aroma of beef stew wafted from the kitchen, just as she'd expected. I'm home, James. Welcome home, Elizabeth. James greeted her in an apron and kissed her cheek. You worked late again today. You must be tired. Elizabeth smiled as she took off her coat. A little, but I feel better now that I'm home. Their house was in a quiet neighborhood in the Boston suburbs, not too large, not too small, a home they had chosen together. It was a property James couldn't have afforded on his salary, but Elizabeth had no reservations about covering most of the cost, saying, "It's our home." During dinner, Elizabeth listened to James talk about his day. He spoke with interest about small happenings at work and interactions with customers. She loved these simple, everyday conversations. By the way, Sophia called today, James said as he picked up his wineglass. Elizabeth frowned. Her relationship with her sister Sophia was complicated. Despite having model-like beauty, Sophia had no steady job and was financially dependent on their parents. She had always been spoiled by their parents and forgiven for everything. That hadn't changed since childhood. What did she say? It's about a Hawaii trip your parents are planning. They want all of us to go next month. Elizabeth put down her fork. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Richard and Helen seem to want a vacation with the whole family, James said gently. But Elizabeth couldn't help but smile bitterly. Her parents favored Sophia, always spoiling her. With Elizabeth, however, they were strict, taking her success for granted and never even expressing gratitude. Still, Elizabeth had been looking after her aging parents for years, helping with their mortgage and medical expenses. I see, she replied flatly. And who's paying for it? James averted his gaze slightly. Well, I haven't heard the details about that yet. I understand, she said resignedly. So I'll be paying in the end. James took her hand. Elizabeth, isn't that what family is about, helping each other? Elizabeth nodded at her husband's words. That was certainly true. However, sometimes that helping felt very one-sided. Recently, she had noticed James visiting her parents' home frequently. He explained it was to improve family relations, but something felt off, especially since it seemed that conversations between James and Sophia were increasing. A trip to Hawaii, Elizabeth took a sip of wine and smiled. All right, maybe spending time with the whole family wouldn't be so bad. James's face brightened. I knew you'd say that. I'll let Sophia know tomorrow. He stood up happily and headed toward the kitchen. The blue skies of Maui Island welcomed Elizabeth's family at the upscale resort on Wailea Beach. The front desk woman greeted them with aloha and a smile. The Harper Carter family reservation. We have an ocean view suite and 2 deluxe rooms prepared for you. As Elizabeth handed over her credit card, she saw her mother Helen smiling with satisfaction. As expected, Elizabeth was paying for everything. Still believing that time spent together as a family was precious, she tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor. James, could you bring the luggage? When Elizabeth called to her husband, he was deep in conversation with Sophia. When they saw her approaching, they abruptly stopped talking. What were you talking about? Elizabeth asked with a smile. Oh, just activities, James answered. seeming a bit flustered. Sophia was saying she's interested in snorkeling. Sophia nodded. Yes, isn't it wonderful underwater? Elizabeth sensed an odd atmosphere between them but nodded. Yes, it's wonderful. After putting their luggage in their rooms and getting settled, they decided to have a late lunch at the hotel restaurant. From the terrace seats, they had a view of the brilliant blue ocean. This is lovely, Helen exclaimed. Elizabeth, thank you so much for making this trip possible. It was a rare expression of gratitude from her mother. Elizabeth was a bit surprised but replied, You're welcome. Sophia needed a little break, Richard. Her father explained. She's been emotionally unstable lately. This Hawaii trip should cheer her up. That's right, Helen agreed. Sophia is a special child. She needs special care. Elizabeth couldn't help but frown. They always called Sophia special and treated her with excessive protection. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's struggles and successes were seen as expected. You agree, don't you, James? Richard asked, turning to Elizabeth's husband. Of course, James answered immediately. Sophia needs time to relax. Elizabeth felt a slight unease at her husband's words. Since when had James become so concerned about her sister? They hadn't been particularly close before. That night, Elizabeth was on the balcony sipping wine and gazing at the ocean. James was in the shower, leaving her alone in the room. Her phone rang with a message notification. It was a casual greeting from Sophia, looking forward to the beach party tomorrow. Elizabeth started to reply, but her fingers froze. Somehow, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden behind these simple words. The next morning, the family was set to spend the day at the beach. However, during breakfast, James suddenly stood up. I'm sorry, but I just got an urgent call from the bank, he said, appearing somewhat uneasy. I need to deal with a work issue. It might take a few hours. While in Hawaii? Elizabeth asked, suspiciously. Aren't you on vacation? Well, yes, but it's an important client issue. James avoided meeting her eyes. I'll be back soon. After he left, Elizabeth said to her parents, Isn't that strange? It's hard to imagine an emergency at James's job that would require attention during vacation. You're too suspicious, Elizabeth. Helen sighed. Always expecting the worst. That's your problem. Mother's right, Sophia agreed. James is just responsible. He's a good man. Elizabeth nodded silently, but anxiety was growing inside her. She took out her phone and called James's company, First National Bank. How may I help you? A receptionist answered. Hello, this is James Carter's wife. I'd like to get in touch with him. Mr. Carter? The woman thought for a moment before answering. According to our records, he's on vacation this week. There are no urgent matters that I'm aware of. I see. Thank you. Elizabeth hung up. Her heart began to race. James had lied. But why? And where was he? And what was he doing? By lunchtime, James had not returned. Elizabeth sat on the terrace, trying to participate in the conversation. Her parents and Sophia were chatting happily, as if James's absence didn't concern them at all. Sophia, that's your phone notification, Elizabeth said, noticing a sound coming from her sister's bag. Sophia hurriedly reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Elizabeth caught a glimpse of a message displayed on the screen. All set for today. The sender's name was J. Sophia quickly pressed the phone to her chest, saying, It's nothing, just some travel consultation. From whom? Elizabeth asked, trying to appear calm. Just a tour guide. Sophia blushed slightly. He's looking into some options for us. Elizabeth nodded quietly. She tried not to show her emotions, however. Inside, a storm was beginning to rage. Jay was almost certainly James. And what preparations were they referring to? If James says he's going out alone tomorrow, I'm going to follow him, Elizabeth suddenly decided. What are you saying, Elizabeth? Helen exclaimed. Following your husband is insane. You should trust him. Mother is right, Elizabeth, Sophia said persuasively. You're being paranoid. But Elizabeth's intuition was urging her to seek the truth. Something was fundamentally wrong, and she needed to know what it was. If nothing is being hidden, then there's no problem, Elizabeth said quietly. As the morning sun turned Maui's ocean golden, Elizabeth was already awake. She had barely slept all night, watching James's sleeping face beside her. She had been planning her day. At breakfast, James was nervously checking his phone. Sorry, I have another work errand today again, he said. What kind of errand? Elizabeth asked calmly. Well, there's a problem I couldn't resolve yesterday. He was evasive. I need to go out for a bit. I'll be back by afternoon. Elizabeth looked at her parents and Sophia. They said nothing, continuing their meal as if they had expected this. James, she said quietly, if you're lying, tell me honestly now. What are you talking about? James frowned. I'm just going to work. Richard cleared his throat and interrupted. Elizabeth, trust your husband. Being suspicious isn't good. That's right, Helen agreed. You always expect the worst. That's why you can't be happy. Elizabeth closed her mouth, but was determined inside. She nodded silently and continued eating breakfast. After James left, she told her parents, I'm going shopping. Her parents looked relieved and said, have fun. Sophia showed an unnatural smile and added, hope you find some nice souvenirs. Elizabeth disguised herself with sunglasses and a cap. By the time she left the hotel, she could still see James. He was walking quickly down the beach road toward a taxi stand. Elizabeth quickly caught another taxi and asked the driver, please follow that car. Plain detective, ma'am? The older driver raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem? Elizabeth responded coldly. Not at all. The driver shrugged. Not uncommon in Hawaii. It's a romantic place. All sorts of drama happens. They followed James's taxi to the northern part of the island. About 20 minutes later, James got out in front of a small white church. A sign reading McKenna Chapel was visible. Please wait here, Elizabeth told the driver, handing him cash. I'll be right back. She hid a short distance from the church and watched James enter the chapel. When he disappeared, Elizabeth slowly approached the church. She could faintly see inside through the chapel windows. Elizabeth's heart was pounding, and her hands were shaking. She took a deep breath and quietly entered through a side door. The sight she witnessed left her frozen. Sophia, dressed in a white wedding gown, stood before the altar next to James, in a tuxedo. They were holding hands, as a man who appeared to be a minister was reading something. In the front row of the church sat Elizabeth's parents, happy smiles adorning their faces. Elizabeth hid in the shadow of a wall and leaned forward slightly to hear their voices. She doesn't know, right? Sophia's anxious voice could be heard. Don't worry, relax, James answered as he held her hand. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's so oblivious she won't notice. Helen laughed. Elizabeth's head is always full of work. She can't even imagine our plan. What happens after the wedding? Richard asked. First, I'll ask for a divorce and get half of Elizabeth's assets. Her pride is so high that she'll give in without a fight. James's voice was cold and calculating. Then we'll move to New York. I have shares in her company too, so if things go well, I might even get on the board. And we won't have to worry about our old age, Helen said happily. Elizabeth won't abandon us, so if we share her wealth, our remaining years are secure. When your remarriage to Sophia becomes public, it will damage Elizabeth's reputation at her company, Richard added. Then she won't be able to resist us. Elizabeth's body was trembling, but her eyes were cold and clear. She took out her smartphone and began recording the conversation. Then she quietly filmed the ceremony. What do you think Elizabeth is doing right now? Sophia asked with a giggle. Probably sitting idly at the hotel. James shrugged. She thinks she's smart, but she's actually easy to fool. That's why I married her. A cold anger spread through Elizabeth's heart, but no emotion showed on her face. Her analyst's mind was already planning her next move. Once she determined she had gathered enough evidence, she quietly left the church. She returned to the waiting taxi and said, Please take me back to the hotel. Are you all right? The driver looked at Elizabeth in the back seat with concern. You look pale. Yes, I'm fine, Elizabeth replied calmly. There was no tremor in her voice. I just need to make some changes to my life plans. Back at the hotel, Elizabeth entered her room and locked the door. She sat on the bed and reviewed the recordings and photos she had collected. Everything was clear. Her husband, sister, and parents had all betrayed her. In Elizabeth's head, a cool analysis began. She opened her laptop and started writing emails. The first was to her lawyer friend, Rachel Bennett. Rachel, the first need urgent legal advice. I have evidence of my husband's infidelity and fraudulent actions. Please review the attached files. Prepare divorce proceedings on the most favorable terms possible. Also, please advise me on how to legally stop financial support to my parents. The next email was to her private banker, David. Please urgently move all assets in my name to accounts unknown to my family. Also, Prepare the documents to initiate the sale of our home. I will explain the details upon my return. Finally, she emailed the HR director, Sarah. For personal reasons, I need to return from vacation earlier than planned. I'll be taking the first flight back to New York tomorrow morning. I'll return to normal duties next Monday. After sending all the emails, Elizabeth opened her suitcase and began packing only the essentials. Her movements were mechanical and efficient. There was no time for tears of sadness or anger. Now was the time for action. Elizabeth smiled quietly. They had underestimated her. Neither her family nor her husband knew how calm and calculating she could really be. They didn't understand why she was called the sharpest investment analyst on Wall Street. You chose the wrong person to cross, she whispered, turning her back to the beautiful Maui ocean visible from the window. Elizabeth began preparing her revenge. In her heart, there was sadness for the people she had once loved, but even stronger was her determination, the determination to make them pay for their betrayal. Elizabeth left Hawaii before dawn. She left a short note at the front desk addressed to my family. Had to leave early for urgent business. Enjoy your vacation. Just that cold message. On the plane to New York, Elizabeth stared out the window at the clouds, hardening her heart as she formulated her plan. Her mind was calm and clear. The analytical skills and decisiveness she had cultivated as a top investment analyst were now shaping her revenge. When the word revenge crossed her mind, she was a bit surprised. She hadn't thought she would harbor such emotions, but she told herself this wasn't just emotional retaliation, but seeking just compensation for betrayal. Upon arriving at her Boston home, Elizabeth immediately took action. Her movements were efficient. First, she met face-to-face with Rachel Bennett, the best divorce attorney. "This is complete fraud," Rachel declared, after seeing the recordings and photos from Hawaii. "Legally, it could even be considered attempted bigamy. We can proceed with divorce on the most favorable terms." "Thank you, Rachel," Elizabeth answered calmly. "I also want to stop financial support to my parents." "That's possible too," Rachel showed her documents. "Your assistance to your parents was provided without legal contracts, so it can be stopped at any time." Elizabeth also met with the private banker and changed access to all joint accounts, moving assets to separate accounts unknown to James and her family. Using her knowledge as an economic analyst, she also began procedures to legally block access to her parents' retirement pensions. "The price for trying to use my life will be high," Elizabeth determined. Next, she arranged for movers. Following her instructions, they moved most items from the house to a new storage. Location, memorable photos, expensive furniture, art collections they had gathered together. She took everything. "Leave everything James chose," she coldly instructed. In reality, there was almost nothing. After all, she had created most of their home life. After the movers left, she wrote just one word in red paint on the empty wall. The word looked like a scream from her heart. She also knew that her parents valued social reputation above all else, so she organized all the evidence of her father's affairs, her mother's false charity activities, and tax evasion. These were family secrets she had known about and kept quiet for years. "Just as they didn't care about my reputation, I won't care about theirs," Elizabeth said to herself. Finally, she contacted a local real estate agent and initiated procedures to sell the house. "I want to be free from this place of betrayal as soon as possible," she said. When all preparations were complete, Elizabeth moved to a new apartment. She told no one her new address, completely erasing her traces, and she waited for the day James and the others would return from Hawaii. That day, she was working normally in her office. While analyzing numbers on the screen, she occasionally checked her cell phone. Finally, a message arrived from Rachel. "They've arrived at the house. Everything is proceeding according to plan." Elizabeth smiled quietly and returned to work. When James, Sophia, and her parents returned from Hawaii, a shocking sight awaited them. Opening the front door, they first saw an empty house with "betrayal" written large on the wall. Cautiously proceeding to the living room, they found only a heavy wooden table remained, with divorce papers and property division documents neatly arranged on it. And Rachel, Elizabeth's lawyer, stood there in an expensive suit with a cold expression. "What's happening?" asked a bewildered James, to whom Rachel calmly explained. "Miss Elizabeth Harper knows everything, including the ceremony in Hawaii," she said as she played the photos and recordings from the chapel on a tablet. Sophia turned pale, and her parents were speechless. "Where is she?" James asked frantically. "We need to talk. You no longer have a say," Rachel coldly retorted. "Miss Elizabeth will not return to your lives. This is the last encounter." On the table were also legal documents showing that Elizabeth had emptied all family joint bank accounts and had begun procedures to sell the house. "This is a legitimate response to fraudulent acts," Rachel continued. "Miss Elizabeth has withdrawn all retirement funds for her parents. It's clear that you needed her assistance for mortgage and medical expenses. Arrangements had also been made for the parents' hidden debts and economic problems to become public in their community. Evidence of your improprieties in charity work and tax evasion is ready to be submitted to authorities," Rachel calmly announced. "However, the disclosure of this information may change, depending on your actions from today forward." Further, it was revealed that James and Sophia's marriage was legally invalid. Bigamy by a married person is not legally recognized. This is an act that could be subject to criminal penalties, it was explained, causing the blood to drain from James's face. "I want to talk to Elizabeth," Helen said in a trembling voice. "She's our daughter. Unfortunately, she no longer thinks so," Rachel replied matter-of-factly. "Let me convey her words. Blood relation is a coincidence, but betrayal is a choice." James showed his anger. "I won't let her get revenge. I have rights too. On that point, please look at this." Rachel showed another document. It was a notice from the HR department of Elizabeth's company. There had been an inquiry about James's employment at the bank, reporting that there were serious questions about his integrity. "Your position at the bank is also in jeopardy," Rachel calmly informed him. "If you choose to fight further, Miss Elizabeth is prepared to release all evidence." When they tried to object, 2 security guards appeared and notified them to remove remaining possessions and vacate the house within 24 hours. The house was already in the process of being sold. James and the family realized that their plan had completely backfired, and they were at a loss. Their future plans had crumbled in an instant, and now they were in dire straits, both financially and socially. That night, Elizabeth was drinking wine on the balcony of her new apartment, looking up at the starry sky. There was pain in her chest, but also a sense of liberation. She had chosen to live honestly with herself. Her cell phone rang. It was from Rachel. "It's all over," the lawyer informed her. "They've agreed to the terms. They'll leave without a fight." "Thank you," Elizabeth answered quietly. After hanging up, she exhaled deeply. 2 years later, in a Manhattan high-rise, Elizabeth Harper, as vice president of a major investment firm, looked down at the city from her large glass office. The view of skyscrapers visible from the windows symbolized her new life. On her desk were photos with new friends, and on the wall hung certificates honoring her achievements. "Miss Harper, preparations for the board meeting are complete," the secretary called. "Thank you, Lauren." Elizabeth smiled as she organized her documents. After the divorce, she had returned to her maiden name. Elizabeth shone more brightly than before. She spent time with a psychological counselor once a week, learning to value herself. With the counselor's help, she was able to face and overcome the pain of the past. "True strength is having the courage to stand up," she had written in her diary. Before heading to the meeting, she glanced at a newspaper clipping in her desk drawer. It was an article about her ex-husband and family. In a small apartment in the Chicago suburbs, James was returning from yet another interview, wearing a cheap suit. He opened the door with heavy steps and muttered, "Failed again." Since his divorce from Elizabeth, his career had been on a downward trajectory. He had lost credibility, and his reputation in the banking industry had plummeted. Next to him was Sophia, who now worked as a supermarket cashier. Her once beautiful face was clouded with fatigue and regret. What were we thinking then? She had asked herself many times. Elizabeth's parents also faced harsh reality. Having lost financial support, they had to move to a modest apartment for the elderly. Furthermore, their social reputation had completely collapsed due to the disclosure of secrets in their community. Former friends had distanced themselves, and they were facing a lonely old age. There was a knock on Elizabeth's office door. "Come in," she answered, and a man with a warm smile peeked in. "I came to confirm our lunch date before the meeting." Daniel Evans smiled at her. He was a university professor she had met at her investment seminar a year ago, and now her new partner. "Of course I haven't forgotten," Elizabeth returned his smile. His presence gave her peace. That weekend, Elizabeth was hosting a barbecue party in the garden of her new home. Surrounding her was the family she had chosen, friends who truly valued her. Next to her stood Daniel, sending her warm glances. "Let's make a toast." Elizabeth raised her glass. "To a new chapter in life." She smiled quietly. Elizabeth had finally understood. True family isn't about blood relations, but relationships where people respect and support each other. She hadn't completely forgiven her parents or James, but she had learned from their betrayal and become stronger. "We can choose to walk through life with people who know and respect our value," she told her friends. "Blood ties are a coincidence, but real bonds are a choice." Elizabeth's new life began when she chose to know her worth and build genuine relationships. From the ashes of betrayal, she had found herself in true happiness.